my friend Andy Singer passed away this past Sunday. And it hit me hard. Definitely did. Now, I met Andy in 1978, a month or two after he opened a store, Sound by Singer. So in 1978, I went there. It was actually not really a store because it was in his parents' living room. Very large living room. Anyway, here in New York City. And I went there to hear these speakers by a company, a British company, I Am Freed. And I'm listening to the speakers, and something weird happened. That Andy and I are just talking about music, talking about sound, talking about the gear. And there was a connection there. Something happened. Something happened between me and Andy, it's weird, that affected me and changed me in ways that were completely unexpected. Anyway, here's what happened. So I wound up buying the speakers, and usually after I buy a product from a store, that's kind of the end of it, right? Unless I'm going to buy something else. But I wound up calling Andy a couple of days later and said, now remember, this is in his parents' living room. His store was in his parents' living room. Anyway, so I call him up a couple of days later and say, hey, I had such a good time. You mind if I come back and just hang out? And he's like, yeah, he wasn't doing much. So I go there, and we just kept going. We kept talking about audio and music and sound and fun. And we were both in our 20s, and we really had this connection. And I kept going back and just hanging out there and talking about music. And it got to be a thing. Anyway, it slowly turned into that I was working for Andy, right? I kind of knew everything in the store. Some of the lines were Linn. He had Linn turntables. He had Spender. He had Morton Short. He had Freed. He had Spatial Coherence, this electronics company, Van Alstyne. Anyway, I knew the line by this point because I had been there like 20 times or something. So one day I go there, and Andy says to me, I'm going to run some errands. You want to just hang out here in case the phone rings or somebody wants to hear a demo, you can do it? And I was like, yeah, sure, okay. So he leaves. I'm there alone, and I'm just playing the tunes, and somebody calls and says they want to come by and hear something, and I said, yeah, sure, And so that's how it slowly evolved into my job. It was funny. Anyway, the point of this story is that I met Andy, and that's how I got my start in the audio business. I worked for Andy for, 16 or 17 years. It was an intense time. It was the beginning, 1978, the 70s and 80s were kind of the golden age of high-end audio. And Andy was right there, right in the thick of it. And eventually got to be the most successful store in New York City, as far as I can tell, and one of the top stores in the country. And I got to say, it happened, I think, partially luck, but partially because Andy was truly passionate about audio. He loved audio. He loved music, and he was a really good businessman, even though he had never been in business before he started Sound by Singer. And it lasted. It lasted until now. It lasted until Andy's passing. That's a good long run. But anyway, I wouldn't be here today doing what I do on YouTube if it wasn't for Andy, because what I learned in those years was how to talk to people. I learned a lot about audio. I learned a lot about how people think about audio. And I became a writer, and I eventually started this YouTube channel. But it all really started with that day. I don't know exactly which day it was, what time of year it was even. In 1978, when I went to Sound by Singer to listen to Freed speakers, and the rest is history. But Andy was an amazing person, very powerful presence. He had passion. He loved what he did. He loved being in business. He loved it as the business grew. He eventually grew to have at times, I think, as large as 18 or 20 people working at Sound by Singer, doing installations and salespeople and clerical people. And yet Andy never lost sight of the goal, of what this was all about. It was about bringing the experience of great sound to people. And to be there, with him through that, through so many changes. It started out as 2-channel, and then it was home theater and custom installation and all these different aspects of the business. Now, our friendship, it evolved over time. In the beginning, in those early years, after the store closed, we would go out to have dinner. We would go out to shows. I remember we went to see, we closed the store early one day just to go see Apocalypse Now. We were, inseparable in the early days. The first 3 or 4 years we were together constantly, it felt like. And then in the later years, I occasionally would drop in and see him. It wasn't like the early days, but when we were together, Andy and I in a room, something happened. There was some connection. And I've had some terrific conversations with him recently about all of this and how important it was to me, and just being part, just having this together, this thing that we did together, at least in the early days. You meet somebody, and there's a connection there, but when it lasts, when it really lasts, and you're not always together, you're not always on the same page, but there's something there, and it lasts, as it did in this case, 46 years. Thank you, Andy Singer.